side, I think, than I do. I think she's journalistic background.
Yeah, sure. I think when I've done training or keynotes, many people that do keynotes, they don't like Q&A. I love it.
Why
because
is that?
It gets me excited. So if somebody said to me, I've done it all the time, if you look, keynote for 45 minutes and then Q&A, so 50 minutes Q&A, so I'll do 35 or 40 minutes presentation, and then I leave more time for Q&A because it keeps me on my toes.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people ask you some questions, you're thinking, God,
Where's that come from?
But it's, I remember in a Bible study when I was at Duke Street, there's a sister there, never spoke for years.
Yeah.
She asked a question one day, and I thought, neck back, where'd that come from? I had to think.
Yeah.
It's clear she'd been listening.
Yeah.
Because there's no way she could ask a question like that without listening.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
the question stumped me. It was an intelligent question. Then I started to question this whole idea about her husband was a deacon. He wasn't a bright guy.
He wasn't a bright guy.
No, he wasn't bright.
Yeah.
She clearly was.
Yeah.
Yeah, she clearly was. She asked this question and I thought, my gosh.
So what were you, when you question that, he's the deacon.
Because it's male, wasn't it?
Does he have the voice? Yeah.
No,
I'm saying the voice, that actually, from his position, his maleness, does he then occupy that sort of space where his voice is being heard more than hers?
Yeah, of course, yeah. And that's how it was of that generation, of our parents' generation, that's how it was.
Because if you look at it, our mothers were the ones who educated us in most cases. Our fathers at work, our mothers spent more time with us. And
yeah, of course.
Oh, yeah, but yeah, I know myself personally that my mum and dad, my mum's family, they had a shop, they had land in the village, and my dad came from down the bottom, was poorer, and it always featured in the relationship.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
He always felt as if she slightly looked down on him, etc. there, and all that sort of stuff. A load of dynamics with it, which essentially come from that type of thing there.
Absolutely,
But if you were out, you heard him first.
Yeah.
But then, isn't that a male thing, though?
Oh God, but look at me. I do it now myself.
Yeah, we. I mean, recently, actually, I was told, somebody said to me, I was invited to a podcast, and during the break, this guy says, "Bro, you can chat." I'm like, that's what you asked me to come here and do, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. But then, I've heard it more than, kind of twice that,
So you think there's some truth in it?
I think there's some truth in it, you know what I mean?
Well, if somebody's invited to an interview, what are you meant to do?
It's the talk.
Just kind of look at them.
Yeah,
that's
a podcast is about talk, isn't it?
It literally is. It is.
Yeah.
So, pastor, doctor, brother.
Well, brother's good. I think now, because I'm not pastoring, I think I can call pastor is to do with your leading the church.
That's it.
Reverend,
that's
that was good. Reverend.
But
I tend not to use that much now. I'm bishop, I certainly do. People still call me that there.
Is it?
Yeah, apparently, because I've not done anything naughty. Which is warranting it to be defrocked.
Literally defrocked.
But that's the thing, I never really understood the idea of defrocking,
Yeah, I think if you do something naughty, bishops, if you do something naughty, it's one or two things. Well, three things. Either you mess around with a woman that's not your wife, or you're found with your hands in the offering plate, or you become a heretic.
So
you're talking sex, finance, and heresy.
Yeah,
and heresy.
Pretty much. Yeah. It's usually the thing. It's usually a men's downfall, isn't it?
That's it. That's literally it. That's really literally it.
Yeah. So yeah.
Oh, I always let it run. I let it run. Cause
that's where the pasta bit was coming in.
But that's
our introduction. We haven't done it for a while, have we? So we probably did more formal intro.
Literally, no, it's been a while. It really has been a while. It's been a while. We took some time off, throughout September, really.
Right. Okay.
Even though now it's like we're just catching on.
Yeah. Okay.
And also it kind of gave us time to plan.
Yeah, of course.
To be more, because I think in the first few episodes, we just invited people and we just spoke. But this time around, we thought maybe what we needed to do was to ask people who are well versed in certain areas. I mean, in your case, I mean, you have a book to prove that very thing. But we are not really going to be, you're not going to be tied to the book.
You sure?
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I've just read it.
I know.
I want to ask him questions on it. No, joking aside.
Well, look, the thing is, I'm left to wherever you guys want to take it.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. We thought, you know, I mean, we don't get an opportunity to hang around, you know. I mean, I'm yet to be invited to Donald's house for lunch. You know.
It's interesting. He always says that. He's never ever in that same breath saying, and then I will return.
Right.
Yes, well, you know what I mean. Depend.
You know that man's there.
Yeah.
No, but isn't it sometimes you invite yourself over just to test the waters? Because I don't even know what his culinary
skills
sort
are.
of like, you know, I could,
Uncle Ben ball in the bag.
You know, but joking aside, I was thinking about this the other day. I think I was talking to someone yesterday about it, saying that you and I, Delroy, we attend the Man Talk. Been doing for a while, and I just thought most of the men I know, I mean, in fact, I can't remember the last time someone just knocked on my door and said, "I'm just passing." So that for men, when we meet, it's when we meet at somewhere or we're doing something, but it's not a meet, I'm just passing to see how you are to see where you live. And as it used to be in the old days, and maybe that's a product of the social communication we have nowadays, so you don't need to do that. But it does mean that for many men, they can end up, well, actually, especially, you know, like me, I live on my own, where you don't see people.
No, you don't.
You know, at home you don't see people at all there. So, I mean, and that's one of the things which, you know, in our conversations with Trims and Talk, it is very much centred on black men's mental health, black men's well-being, and Man Talk is a part of that. And your background with psychotherapy, your background there was in the church for many years there. I mean, you know, we've talked, you know, many times about these sorts of themes there.
And I think the whole thing around about community, really that's what it's about, isn't it? Community. Which you can just say it's people gathering together, but the impact of people gathering together is just huge, really. So, for example, one of the things I'm thinking of, going out now is actually quite expensive.
That's it.
And I'm thinking, you know what? Instead of going out, I might just start inviting friends to the house. And I just think that it's just, for two people, sometimes 60, 70, 80 quid. And it's not a fantastic meal, sometimes just 2 course.
That's it.
So, this whole thing about and the whole thing around food, it's prominent in our community, in your community as well. Food, talking, maybe offloading some of the stuff we're going through.
That's it.
But just being in a space where you can talk with people of like minds, people who look like you and all that type of stuff. It's really helpful.
Because one of the things actually I applauded Mark Hutchinson, who was a mutual friend, is the fact that I remember him inviting me over to his house. That was before, literally, like I'll say probably a couple of weeks before he passed. He had organized an event to his house and people were coming, dinner, and which I still kick myself because it's like I was engaged somewhere else, but I should have made time to go and see him, because this is the thing. Our people we've always met, and we met in each other's houses, like you're rightly saying, but it's a tradition that I think has disappeared, maybe because we are more sophisticated than
allegedly.
I mentioned there earlier about social media, and if you wanted 30 years ago, if you wanted to see somebody you had not seen them for a while, you walked round. And when when my marriage sort of ended, and I had this little, moved out of the family home, and I had a little terraced house, and my son, who was 22, 23 at the time, just finished university, he was there, and my brother came up from London and my cousin also came up, and the two were not that close, but they came up together. And my son said to me, "Why do they come?" Because he'd never seen them together, for a visit. And I said, "Oh, they've come to see where I live." He said, "What do you mean, see where you live?" I said, "That's what you do. Someone's moved somewhere else new. You go and, even if it's the one time you visit, I must see where you live." And that sort of thing, that physical act of going to someone's house there, I think is... I think it's a loss, actually. I think it's a big loss.
No, I think it is a big loss.
Because you could sit with someone, then you sit. So maybe what needs to be done, I tried it after that, doing this little thing, I call it like a supper club there, where I invite people round. And actually, as you're talking, because, you were saying on Friday at Man Talk there, that idea about community and about sort of like, how important it is to be a part of something. And that, for many people, and your book there is very much about African Caribbean men, that loneliness is a key factor, isn't it?
It is. It definitely is.
And also it's the damages of loneliness and isolation. I don't know if you're aware of the facts that according to stats, loneliness, isolation is equivalent to smoking 16 cigarettes a day.
Is it?
Yeah, the impact it has on the body. So just lets you know how bad it is. And then that affects the immune system, so then you're prone to illnesses and so forth just by being lonely or feeling isolated. And then if you are feeling lonely, and one has to be careful, if you go and visit someone and you're vulnerable yourself, it's almost as though the loneliness is contagious. It's very powerful. The whole thing about loneliness and isolation.
But then, you just said there, you go to visit someone, you would have thought that act of visiting would be a positive. But that's what you're saying, is if you're both in a negative state, then it's not necessarily as helpful as it could be.
No, absolutely not. No. Yes, because I remember I did a broadcast on it some time ago. I was shocked myself that I think the percentage is quite high, something like 40-odd%, that if you visit somebody who's lonely or feel isolated and you spend a long time with them, and if you're vulnerable yourself, it's almost as though it's contagious.
Wow.
No, that is
You've got me on
yeah, because you remember when I think it was the last administration when they came up with the Minister for Loneliness.
Oh, serious.
Even they didn't really. I mean, I know we laughed about it. Many of us laughed about it because we didn't really know what that will actually entail or what it was about.
It's I'm convinced that from my church background, the particular stance we had on separation and remarriage, some of the, I hope I'm not talking out of turn, some of the women, I think they could have been remarried and now they're in their 80s on their own. I suspect had they been with somebody, life could have been a lot different.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah. But then again, for church, I mean, my sister, who I've never seen her as particularly religious, but when my brother died, his widow, who used to be a Rasta, she has become born again, so my sister goes with her, and they clearly both of them together are enjoying the community which the church is giving them, even if it's just that Sunday morning. Sunday morning, and I've been a couple of times with them, and there is something about that. You feel like you're at. There's nearly a familiarity, the way people are, the way people do things, even the things which irritate you. You think, well, I mean, where that come from?
Yes,
but you feel quite good with it as well. There,
So you got the community of people. You got music, you got singing, which is uplifting for the spirit, and all the rest of it. And even if your problems, you're gonna have to face your problem Monday morning, but still, you've had a couple of hours whereby, in a sense, the body's had chance to recharge, refresh. I think what I understand, I think it's in the book somewhere that I spoke about worship as being multisensory. It's not just hearing and seeing, but it's also what you feel, what it does to the body as well. So for me, worship is much more than just singing. It's singing, but it's a lot more as well. And perhaps if there's movement in some of our churches, so you've got movement, seeing, hearing, witnessing, And we know that music is therapeutic anyway.
That's it. But don't you think, like sometimes there are certain denominations that outlaw that the feeling, the emotional aspect of worship. To the point that it can be it can be detrimental to the soul.
But you're not talking there about black churches, are you?
Yeah, I mean, black
majority of churches do that. You can see I'm real ignorant on this.
Right, not Pentecostal churches, but I'm aware, and I'm not going to call any denomination.
Yeah.
But where they just don't have drums.
Right.
They just don't have drums at all, and I don't know what that's to do with. I've not studied it enough.
Yeah.
But certainly, usually evangelical, charismatic, Pentecostal black churches, they will have...
That what's my family went to Pentecostal.
Yeah, so you'd have a... Churches that large, you have a full band.
But that's it. I think, like the drum thing, there was a school of thought about, kind of tying the drum to the African continent and saying that the drum has, kind of, for lack of a better word, like... demonic, kind of demonic connotations, which again, I think usually when you get, some of our Caucasian brothers and sisters, doing a little research, usually their background is either was in rock music or something different. When they come in, then they suddenly start splitting hairs.
And for me, my views are that where is this idea that it's come from Africa that's wrong? And I think, and I just, even, for example, I've known some Caribbean people say they don't do nine night because of its historical, West African retention. Well, I actually think it's a good thing. There was a particular context. And I think people then, what we've done, we've used it. So when people gather, I don't think for 1 minute. So my understanding from the slave trade was that there was this idea that the spirits went back to Africa. I think if you spoke to people now, nobody believes that.
No one.
But it's a gathering of people when a family has experienced a bereavement.
That's it.
Yeah, they're not on their own. There's food, there's celebration. The men may be in one room playing dominoes and so forth. But it's ensuring that the person not left on their own. However, obviously, once the funeral is done, then people then really do need the support then because it can be really lonely. Yeah. But so I think sometimes when I hear of some of the things, I just think, where's that come from? And not everything that came from... Well, in fact, you could say not everything came from Africa is bad, not everything come from the Caribbean is bad, not everything in England is bad. But where's it kind of come from, this particular idea that the drums has some connotation to... Maybe the word that you didn't use, but almost as though not demonic or evil. Because if you speak to Rastas, the whole drum
is the drum.
Yeah, it's a way of communicating.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, because I mean, for me, for someone who's not religious, if I was to go to church, I'd want that type of church. I want a church which has music. I want a church which has the drum. I want a church where you sing. I want a church where you dance. I want some sort of religious or ceremony or something where there is that a connection with what I see nearly not in my everyday life, but enough of that there. This is what I'm familiar with there. And when you were talking there about nine night, etc., and people don't always use the phrase nine night, but they do often, very very frequently, have that idea of gathering. And you expect to have
absolutely
that.
Correct. Yeah.
And I know when my sister died when I was 27, so that's many years ago. And I hadn't seen a dead person until then. Never been to a funeral until then, since 1987. And everything about the funeral, and that funeral in 1987 was like old school. Old school. And everything about it was as I expected.
Right, okay.
Because it was connected with my upbringing. It was, people coming up from London with a triafish. It was just what you expected. The little bit of fallout which you have with people there. They've taken over. Who's going to have the biggest say, which is normal for any sort of funeral, but done in that culturally cultural way which you were familiar with there. But that thing then about culture and community and how. If you're, for some people, not to everybody, some people, when you're completely outside of it, that how it can feel like you don't have a support. But you may not even know you don't have that support.
Yeah, it's true. You know, as you talk, that one of the things when we had COVID, one of the things that struck me that I know our people, so you couldn't go to places of worship, and I knew our people that once you have the all clear to go back in, it'd be business as usual, and I thought, no, hang on. Something major has happened in the world and some of our communities, some of our congregations. We lost 3 or 4 people, literally overnight, and all. People have been there for decades. Yeah. And so I looked at this thing called lament, and it's there in Scripture, Lamentations, where people bring their pains and sorrow to God. There's an actual way of doing it. So, in a sense, even before the invention of psychotherapy, there's a place in Scripture which is cathartic for us to express the sorrow and all the rest of it. And was the point I was going to make in terms of lament. Oh gosh, I've lost my point. It'll come back to me. But there is this place that we can be mournful and be sorrowful without being frowned upon. Yeah, there's space for it, and that's really important. There was a point I was going to make, but I've lost it now. But anyway, it'll come back to me if it's important.
So I was thinking. So when did you? I mean, like when you started off in school. I mean, I assume you were educated here in the UK.
Yeah, I was born here.
You were born here.
Yeah, born Nottingham.
Nottingham.
Yeah.
Just around the corner. From
Yeah.
So take us through, the earlier years. What were the building blocks to actually get you to where you are, if there were any?
That's a good question, because I didn't know how the interview would go today. I was thinking about my mum and dad. Mum was very bright at school, always top of the class, but parents couldn't afford for her to go any further. She told me she never told the time till she was 16. There's no need to, because she could tell the time from the sun. And I remember being in Jamaica with her, and she didn't have a watch on. I said to her, as a joke, so I was 28 at the time, I says, what time is it? She was accurate within 15 minutes, and she didn't have a watch. And I looked at my thing, and I knew she'd not seen mine. So my mother was bright. My dad was very ambitious, but I didn't see him much as a kid, because not that he abandoned the family, but he was a builder's joiner, and we lived in Newark, with farming town. There's no work, so he travelled out to work. I think, and in Newark at the time, there was a strong West Indian community, mainly Jamaican. And then 1969 or thereabouts, Dad wanted to go to Canada because there were massive recruitment for tradesmen. I remember being on the train. I remember going to, it would have been the immigration office I was told later on it was Leeds. I remember sitting with my sister and mum and dad talking to an Asian man. That's what I remember. Years later, I said to Mum, why didn't we go to Canada? So she said, well, we went to the immigration centre. We had the interview with the doctor, and he said, everything's fine. You'll hear from me in 2 weeks. We didn't hear from him. And then when Dad made some inquiries, he died of a heart attack.
Oh, the guy?
Yeah, the doctor did. So that just put my dad off completely going to Canada. So we ended up going to Leicester. So I said to folks, Leicester and Canada.
That's
well,
juxtapose that.
Yeah. But so
no disrespect to Leicester.
No. So that's where it was. Now, building blocks. I think it's a very good question. Mum and Dad told me to work hard, but they didn't really kind of interrogate my schoolwork. There was the assumption that the teachers were looking after us because of their colonial experience in Jamaica. And I only knew that when I started doing research. I thought, no wonder our parents kept believing the teachers, not believing us. Yeah. I was seeing some stuff at school, what teachers were doing to us. And you go home and you tell your parents, and they don't believe you. And I couldn't understand why they didn't believe me. So there was that. So building blocks, I can't really say that school was brilliant. It was good for friends. But I think when I left school at 16 and took up athletics, that was a building block for me. And then the building block that really catapulted me into kind of learning, reading and inquiry about the world was started training as a counsellor. But if you ever speak to my mum, she would tell you that as a young boy, I used to ask her some questions, and she said she had no idea where the questions came from. She said, where is this guy getting these questions from? And then she said, when I started senior school, they stopped. And she thought that the questions were being answered at school. They weren't. But when she read the reports that Delroy was naughty and they were really not good reports, she said she didn't recognise the boy she saw in her house and the boy she saw at school. So I think the building blocks, I loved writing, so I was very good at composition, as I called it then. And I started writing short stories for the school newsletter. Then that stopped, and then I wanted to write thriller novels, but I didn't know how to write. And then I stopped after about 10 years because I thought black people don't read anyway. Seriously, I just thought black people don't write, black people don't read. So I stopped about age 20, maybe a bit older. So building blocks, I don't think there are any significant ones. And then it's when I started training as a counsellor. That's when life really changed. I found something that was me, even though I didn't know it was me. And my inroad to counselling was simply this. The church I went to, I was a youth leader, and the Church of God Prophecy, and every year they had a youth camp. So if you went to camp and you were a local church youth leader, you were automatically made a youth camp counsellor. So at age 24, 25, I became a youth camp counsellor. Really enjoyed it, but realised how serious it was. And then the following year, the same thing. And then I said to Mum, I really need to get some training on this. And I searched 2 or 3 years to find training. There wasn't any, but she found a little advert in the local paper. She said, "Oh, there's a counselling certificate here." And I went to the college, very secular. It was a secular counselling course. So they had different views of humanity and all the rest of it. But I was able to learn from it, and then did that, and then got married in 92, then left following year with redundancy from British Telecom, and then I started training as a psychotherapist. So that's how I got into it.
You know, just on that notion there you have about counselling being secular, because one of the things coming in from your book there is very much about the idea of theology and psychology or psychotherapy there as how it being more than that sort of Western secular, that actually it can be also a much more black African centred. It should be, and also that actually it has got a sort of like spiritual theological aspect to it as well. Is that something which in your career as a psychotherapist, for your background, that's something which you've sort of tried, you do sort of practice?
Yeah, well, you perhaps know that in African language and Asian language, they have no word for psychotherapy or counselling. It's just not there, because a lot of that's done with the village elders, and you speak to people and so forth. I think what I decided when I became a pastor, I was very clear I wasn't going to split, meaning I'm a psychotherapist there, pastor over here. The two were going to inform each other. Because one of the things when I worked as a psychotherapist, that you have people who split in the sense that they suppress a part of themselves to function, but it's exhausting. So I decided not to do that. And one of the things I remember, a couple of friends of mine, they were pastors down south, and they were going to an Anglican college, and they were really struggling with some of the theology from the Anglican Church, the Church of England. And they spoke to me one day, and I said to them, "Look, read and study with discernment. Not everything you hear you have to take on board, but it's good to know what other people are thinking." So, and that was my view with psychotherapy. Not everything that Freud said, because it was kind of Freudian, that I kind of took to. But I used one of his quotes, for example. So go back to the whole thing about intergenerational trauma, which we may get onto. There's a quote that I use all the time when I do training, if it's around trauma. Freud said this: "Unexpressed emotions never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways." And I found that to be true.
I read in a little quote from your book, just four words: hurt people hurt people.
Right, okay.
So again, that notion there of something being passed, and in this case, clearly a trauma being passed to someone else there is clearly there as well there. And that very idea about, psychotherapy and trauma, I mean, that was something which, when you came to SACMA and you gave a talk for us, which is, I think the title we had was "Why Black Men Should See a Therapist."
Yeah, sure.
I mean, and it was a sort of like, the title was supposed to be provocative, but I know it's something which you think that actually therapy is important. Why do you think it's so important then, particularly if you connect it with trauma as well?
Yeah, well, I tell you what, let me take it a bit further and come back to your question. Left to me, I'd make therapy mandatory for clergy. We are the most unaware people on the planet. And the reason why...
It's a big one.
and the reason why I say it is that what can happen with lots of clergy, we have views of God that are not theological, and we project it onto the congregation. One thing that therapy does, it can cause you to see some of the stuff that you're carrying, and it can give you another perspective, a more wholesome perspective. So in terms of your question, just remind me what the question was again.
It was a question about, I mentioned there, or referenced the presentation you gave.
Right. Oh, yes, right. So basically, we have experiences, and experiences have energy. They have an impact on us. And as men, this thing we're talking about, black men, we're kind of taught to suck up, just get on with it, and if you cry a bit too much or you're a bit soft, my dad. There was an issue that my dad had with me when I was growing up. He said, "Why are you too finny?" Meaning that I wasn't, for him, the view of a man, I just wasn't it.
Yeah.
He was a hard builder's joiner, and it took me years to understand why I was the way that I was, and that was to do with prenatal stuff in my mother's womb and all that type of stuff, which we can get onto if need be. So I think what we do, we have experiences and we just kind of crack on, we just carry on, but it builds up.
Yeah.
And at some point, with lots of us as men, when things happen, it's like the final straw. I'm not too sure whether we explode or implode. Either way, we cause damage.
Yeah.
And it can cause damage to us. So let me give you an example. As a friend of mine, 54, had a heart attack recently. And I was talking to him some time ago about the job he was doing, lots of stress. Anyway, has his heart attack. So I go to see him, and I decided to a timeline from the time he started his work. So incredibly well paid, high pressure job, multi-billion-pound organisation. And I said, "When did you start the company?" He told me. I said, "And what have you gone through?" He himself was shocked when I showed him the paper. But he's the type of guy, just get on with it. But it's had an effect on him. One incident was that he had a member of staff who eventually took her own life. It was quite gruesome and horrific, so I won't say what. He had to go and empty a locker on his own and went to go and see the family on his own. I said, "Well, Derek, what support did he have? And where's all that stuff gone? You've just kept it within you. Something had to give."
Yeah.
So I think we experience things and we just kind of brush it off, but it's building and it's building, and it could be it's just a whole kind of, it's a cumulative thing, and then something will happen which can be quite minor, and someone says, "Why has Delroy carried on like that?" But what people don't see, they see the last thing that's happened, but they're not seeing what I've been carrying for 20 years. And so therapy then, what therapy can do, it can help us to look at some of these blind spots that we have and just help us to kind of use the word process or just talk about some of the stuff that we might be carrying, but it's preventing us from getting close to people.
In the lift coming up, you and I were talking, and we were, as we do in the lift, we were talking about Fanon.
Right. Yeah.
And I was saying to you about that notion of deconstruction, which, that process has got an element of deconstruction about it. That actually, my reading of Fanon, when he sort of likens deconstruction to the colonial experience, and particularly about Algeria, is one where he's nearly saying to recreate, you have to go for annihilation, and some people can see therapy as, well, why go there? Why go and unearth these buried things, etc. there, and I have to look at things in a different way. So take, for instance, when I was in my 20s and I would meet up with people, I went to school with them, we'd remember days when we used to talk about the beatings we used to get. But them days, we only just laughed and joked about it.
Yeah, sure.
And there would be a few people who would tell you some stories about their beatings where they were being put in the cellar for the weekend, they were stripped and put in the cellar, and then they were beaten in the street, etc. there. I met someone a couple of weeks ago, and they were telling me about someone they knew, how their dad would just beat them in the middle of the street in front of everybody, etc. there. But in my 20s, we joked about it.
Yeah, of course.
That's how we saw it in that normative way as such there. And you can see how some people wouldn't want to go back there. It's a difficult thing to do, isn't it?
It is a difficult thing to do. So you've got, for example, you've got some orientation in psychotherapy. They do very little with the past. It's about the present and looking forward. But quite often, if people want to do developmental work, it's kind of looking at some stuff. Some stuff is too painful to unearth.
Yeah.
And for some individuals, the brain they can't even remember.
Yeah. Because
it was so traumatic. They can't remember. They know something happened, but they can't remember what it is. So what therapy can do, it can unearth some things. So then lots of us as therapists have this real issue with this kind of 6-session model, which doesn't work. It's all right for kind of temporary stuff, but kind of developmental stuff, sometimes it's kind of 2 or 3 years, it can be. And obviously this one's about affordability and so forth. So you're right, some people might not want to go there, but what I would say that in terms of reconstructing, it is scary. But what can happen with some of the trauma? It happened I've seen it with people, with our own people. So let me give you an example. You have a situation whereby, and I've heard men say it, that the father beat them, and then at some point they look the father in the eye and says, "You're never going to make me cry again." That is actually a dangerous thing that's happened, because basically what they've done, they've switched off their emotions.
Yeah.
That's called dissociation. The problem with that is that you protect yourself, but then you then have massive problems in relating to people going forward. And it comes up quite often in romantic relationships. You know, people get close to, a woman might try to get close to you and you kind of keep them away. Because what you've learned, maybe consciously, but now it's automatic or unconscious now, you just keep people out. And then that can be problematic with children, you can't get close to your kids and all the rest of it. So the whole thing around therapy then is actually to explore some of this stuff and maybe to reframe it. And maybe sometimes for some people, they experience something at 10, 11, 12, 13, but they could never express it. Because quite often what happens with us, the cultures which we're from, we're experiencing, but parents never ask us how we're feeling. But we have emotions. So what kids do, in fact, we now know, even if children are pre-verbal, they experience trauma, but they can't talk about it, they can't remember it, but their body remembers it. And it can be later on they start acting away, and they don't even know why they're acting the way that they are. I can give you another example. Somebody I worked with quite some time ago. He was a teenager, late teens, maybe 20. Smoked a lot of weed and drank a lot, and came to see me. And he said his father died, and then kind of the session carried on. And then I went back and I said to him, "Tom, how did your father die?" So his father died when he was 1. So how did your father die? So my mother tells me that I was 1, they wanted a break. So they left me with my auntie. They went away for a weekend. While they were walking, they were walking and the driver swerved to miss something on the road, hit both of them. The parents landed in the river. The dad drowned, but the mother could swim. So she swam to the shore, got a broken hip. So I said to him, your mother couldn't parent you? He said, no, well, apparently I was with my auntie for the next 6 months. And they lived close. So he said to me, the first 8 years, none of my life was horrible because he was surrounded with grief. From 1, even though he was 1 year old, couldn't talk, didn't remember, but his body experienced the trauma and the grief that the family were feeling. Yeah. And then later on, he went missing. And he said to me, he doesn't know how he got home, but there must have been enough money on his card. He got home. And his mother, for years, had not been away on holiday. He was too frightening. She goes away on holiday, and he goes missing. And she was relieved when they found him. And it was the day that the dad died. And he never knew.
But that point you're saying then, because, that notion of intergenerational, you can see there in an individual case there how a family trauma can pass on to a 1-year-old or whatever there, and that becomes a part of that self, doesn't it?
Yeah,
there?
Of course.
And then, again, one of the things in your book there talks there about it in a sort of community cultural sense there, in the Atlantic slave trade there, that that's something which has been on a massive scale for so many of us.
Yeah, and I think, for me the question was simply, as I read about the transatlantic slave trade, I just thought, you subject a society with gratuitous violence for 3 centuries, how can it not affect people?
Absolutely.
How can it not? We know, for example, that somebody comes to see you who's come from a violent home. That's going to have repercussions on his or her relationships with other people, their career prospects, finances, health.
That's it.
And sometimes you speak to that individual, dad was violent, granddad was violent, great-granddad was violent. So in a sense, there's been a pattern of violence. And when a person comes to me, I know they want to break the cycle.
Yeah.
So this whole thing, so we know, psychologists know, medical people know, a child raised in a violent home has significant repercussions on their life and their future outlook. 2 or 3 centuries? I think so. Huge amounts. To the extent we don't fully know.
Yeah.
Because neuroscience has been developed. It's not really developed for us. It's developed for other groups of people.
That's it.
Yeah. So one of the big names is Rachel Yehuda, is a kind of Jewish psychiatrist who. I don't know how. I'll have to read the report again, but there's a way of examining the blood that can test that people have experienced trauma. So she did blood tests on, I think, 2nd or 3rd generation of Holocaust survivors. So there's blood markers that indicates trauma. And then she did the same experiment with returnees from Vietnam, the same thing, who'd witnessed horrific things in Vietnam. And when she measured the blood counts, it was exactly the same as there's three generations of Holocaust survivors.
I mean, there's an American woman, again, another American Jewish woman. She's written a book called Weathering.
Yeah, Arlene Dronimus.
Yes, and in that she starts from the position of, she went to Harvard, and she said of her classmates, in their 60s who have passed early, they're African American. So these are people who all were successful, and she makes this interesting point, which is that for these you're told, work hard, do well, be that exceptional 10th, nearly that Du Bois sort of argument as such.
Sure.
But actually, there's a price in there as well.
Yeah, there is.
And you can see that with COVID, that actually those people who've done all that work, all the hard work, and they're talented, etc., they've probably been slightly removed from the body politics of that community, of their community. They've gone off to some Ivy League university. They've gone off and been some sort of like top lawyer, etc. But all the way along the way, the society they live in, the racialized society they live in, is sort of like wearing away at them.
Absolutely.
And this is a product of the generations before them, etc. They carry with them. Yeah. And it's it's a very sober reading, because you think to yourself, here's a message you're saying to people. We say it to young people, and we're in the university at the moment, that, work hard, do well, and actually, you could die early.
Yeah, I think.
It's a very
no. It's a sobering thought.
Yeah, it is. I think one of the things that we underestimate is the levels of stress that can take place on us. It was quite interesting as well with COVID when you saw the amount of people that were dying. And they have their ideas. I admire their ideas. They have their ideas about multi-occupancy and all the rest of it. And one of the issues for me was that if you spoke to a lot of the black professionals that died, Asian professionals, I said, if you kind of just slip behind the curtain, they're under far more stress than the white peers.
Doing that job.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because I know lots of black professionals, and they'll tell me they've got a heavier workload. They're scrutinised more, interrogated more.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in case when the results came out of COVID, the amount of people of colour who were on disciplinary, and it wasn't 10 or 50, it's something like 70%.
Well, I always say
that's stress.
That is stress.
I always say that this, for me, I mean, I became a vice principal of a sixth form college, and when I became a vice principal of a sixth form college, I went to a union meeting, and this union meeting was for college leaders, and it was in London, and it was black college leaders, and the guy there, the union rep there, said, look, I know some of you probably aren't for unions, etc., but unless you can afford a really good lawyer, I think you do need to be in a union because you need protection. And he said, it's terrible, but this is the reality. 10% of college leaders in the union in London are black. But 50% of my cases are black. So you're in a position of authority.
Yeah.
You're visible, and you're telling people, white people, what to do. You're going to get some payback, something's coming back your way. And my brother used to also say to me, he was became a deputy finance director of a hospital, and he said to me, it's a little bit like your virtues are minimised and your vices maximised.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
And so what you're good at is put down, but what you're, and everyone's got that side of yourself where actually you think about it. You know what? I'm a little bit this, I'm a little bit that, a little bit that. That's gone over there.
And if you think about it, just think for a moment. If you're under that level of pressure 8 hours a day, or more, relentlessly. I used to say to folks, when Cyril Regis who went through the racism on football territory, was it Cyril Regis?
Cyril was just was in that West Bromwich.
Yeah. I said, look, so you've got X amount thousand of fans abusing him. The impact of that doesn't stop when the referee blows his whistle. It continues. And it continues, possibly, he goes the following day to train, and he's got his team who are against him as well. So I said that the impact doesn't stop because the referee blowed his whistle.
And he died in his early 60s.
Yeah, listen, I've got no evidence, but I think I know enough about what stress can do to the body. I remember I was doing some training with some ministers years ago. One of the guys was a former research scientist, and I spoke about how pastors need to look after themselves and so forth. So different organisation, it wasn't a black majority organisation at all. And he came up to me after everybody had gone, and he said, Delroy says, people talk about stress, but they have no idea the impact that stress has on the body. They have no idea whatsoever. So we talk about it very loosely, but they have no idea. So if you're in a place where you're constantly under surveillance and you're constantly having to look over your shoulder, it takes its toll.
Yeah,
has to.
One of the things that you spoke about earlier, you sort of brushed up, past it about your sporting career. Why sport? Was it something that you were naturally good at, or?
You were good at it. Come on, tell the people.
Oh no! I think when I was leaving school the final year, not that I was fit anyway, but I didn't want to end up with being overweight and have a beer belly. But I then knew later on you need to drink a lot of beer to get a beer belly. But anyway, so what I did, I joined a local athletics club at 16. So I did sprints for about a year. And then I remembered we had an AGM one of the days, and a guy called Alan said, "You give me the male athletes, I'll make the sprinters." And I remember thinking at the time, I ain't going to be a hurdler, because I'd had a bad accident at school with a hurdle, fell over it, and I still got the scar to this day on my ankle. So that was a Tuesday. So I thought I weren't going. Anyway, Thursday I turned up for training, and the guy who coached me at the time, he never called me Delroy. He said, "Roy, you're going to do the hurdles." I said, "No, I'm not." And we got into this thing, and there was no letting up from him. So I did. So I went over to the hurdles thing, and the lads who were there kind of laughed at me because it's the first time I'd done it, and I didn't hurdle. I was running and jumping.
Jump.
So, and I don't know how we got onto the 400-metre hurdles. I have no idea. I think I was a bit too short for the 110 because they're 3'6".
Yeah, they're higher.
Yeah, they're high. Yeah, a bit too short. So we did 400-metre hurdles. So I trained for a bit, and then my first event was 1976 was 61.3, and people said it was a really good time for somebody who'd not really trained at it much. And Alan, who had never been a hurdles coach, he was an engineer, very bright guy, still alive. He was competing until his wife passed a few years ago, and in Leicester, and he just guided me through somebody who did hurdles. And then that was 1976, and by 1979 I was number 2 in Great Britain as a 20-year-old.
So what was your PB then?
53.35.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was an English school silver medalist, and under 23 a silver medalist, and I was Midland under 20 silver medalists, so 3 silver medalists.
So were you ever at a point where you represented the country?
Only working for British Telecom. I represented British Telecom twice in France and Norway. We were talking about the 1982 Olympics, I think, or 1982 and 1984, but then I quit shortly. So that kind of took place. But what athletics did, it taught me a lot about self-discipline. And I was with some individuals who, because at the time I was really struggling to get my O levels and so forth, and I met some school teachers who told me, you know, quite openly that they didn't get all their O levels straight off. Some of them, I think, one of the guy called Emlyn Evans, he was a PE teacher, and he had to take his English 7 times before he got it. So it was really encouraging, and they were a good set of people. They really encouraged me to kind of do well with my studies. So athletics was a real kind of major turning point. And the training that I did then has kind of seen me through that next year is 50 years since I've been involved in sport. So I still want to compete next year. Not in hurdles though, but I want to do what they call aquabike, swimming and cycling, because I can't run now. But yes, so there was a period of time when I didn't do much, but pretty much since I've left school I've been involved in sports. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So, I mean, like in a generation where, because many of our young people are no longer as active as we were. I mean, they don't play outside, neither do they, you know, kind of josh around as we used to. How do you change the culture, especially around young people, though?
You know, I was thinking recently, my daughters are now 29. I cannot remember them playing hide and seek in the street, and it's something that we grew up in.
Yeah,
not unless they've got parents that are sporty. So last year I went to a triathlon in Portugal, and there was loads of kids with their parents. So at least the kids are seeing the parents doing sports, and in a sense they kind of grow up with it. Whether or not they get involved in sports is something else, but they see their parents doing it. I think it's very difficult because I think society now is very kind of sedentary. You know, if we work
but it's sedentary when you say that. I mean, I'm going to say that I was, you know, I'm that walking group, and we were driving out about a month ago, and we were driving through Ecclesall Woods, and it's about 9 o'clock in the morning, and there must have been about 20 young people. When I say young people, they're about 10, 11, 12, 13, running through the woods as a group. And I thought to myself, and we thought to ourselves, yeah, we're in that side of the city, the southwest of the city, where people are doing loads of things there. And, you know, I'm going to try and connect it back to that notion of trauma and living in Britain and living in a racialised world there, where actually people's opportunities get narrowed. People's confidence, we were talking about that on Friday, the confidence to do things get narrowed. That even our walking group, it was born in 2004, this idea that actually we just wanted to walk and we didn't really care what other people felt.
Sure.
You know, but on your own you can. Because who wants to be stared at? Who wants to be sort of like feel uncomfortable and etc., which is what for many people they can feel. Many people from the African Caribbean communities can feel that if they want to go and do this, I'm going to be the one on my own there, and I don't want to be that. I have this at work, I have this at school. I don't want that there. I want to be able to, and yet, you know, those opportunities which just help you in life, you know, to manage that working week, to have something which is yours, etc.
Yeah, I think you've raised a really good point, because I think two things. I remembered when I was doing athletics and when I was involved in big competitions, my dad, it was an opportunity for Dad put on his 3-piece suit, and if provided the club was putting on a coach, he'd come with mum and sister. I never saw any of my other Caribbean friends' parents. I don't even know what they look like. And it was interesting, when we trained, you'd have the white parents would come pick up the kids. And when they came out of this stadium, they drove left to the kind of more affluent part of the city. We took 2 buses home. Parents would never come for us. I remember it was chucking it down the rain, and I phoned for my dad to come pick me up. And it came, but really reluctantly, and I vowed I would never ask him again, and I didn't. So in one sense, you could say certain things, but it taught us a level of resilience and so forth. But I think I've had to negotiate that. So when I did athletics, there wasn't many Caribbean lads to start off with, and then there was quite a few, and then the difference between me and them was that they were very talented, but they just wouldn't train, whereas I would, I trained. So who's your audience on this? Is it mainly Caribbean people or
anyone?
Okay, yeah. So let me give you an example. So I was really diligent when I came to training, and I remember one Sunday morning I was competing in Leicester. So I'd look after myself during the week, train properly, eat well at night, go to bed really early, and anyway, I was getting myself changed on Sunday morning. So about 6 of the lads walked in. I said, Delly, what time did you go to bed last night? I said, 9 o'clock. I said, what time do you go to bed? We've not been to bed, we're just coming from blues. And they performed awfully. Not surprisingly, because they spent all night dancing with the women, smoking stuff and all the rest of it. So,
well, that's your self-discipline then, isn't it? So I know the thread running through this is that you have got that self. You recognise the importance of discipline. You have discipline.
Yeah. And I'm having to call back on it now because I've just started my own business 3 years. At 65, I'm having to learn new stuff whereby you think at 65 you should be putting your feet up and life should be easy, but I'm having to learn about marketing, sales and all that type of stuff.
It's weird thing. I was talking to somebody recently and I alluded to that whole thing, this lady I was speaking to, she's very she's well off, she runs her own business and stuff. And then I said to her, I've often thought about doing a PhD. She said to me, it's like, not at your age. and this is somebody who didn't even ask me how old I am.
She just looked at you.
Just looked at me, you know what I'm saying? And
well, the thing is, I didn't go to uni until I was 38.
Yeah.
And then you meet people along the way. And I think, going back to your point, Donald, about being uncomfortable, I've had to be uncomfortable, but you meet good people along the way.
Well,
that encourages you.
I got told something the other week here at the university. I met the president of the African Caribbean Society, and I was really impressed with her. She contacted me. She sort of said we can meet now. It's all done very quickly. And I said to her after our brief meeting, I said, I'm really impressed by that, etc. And she sort of said, it's something which I sort of just do because I was head girl at school, and although I find it uncomfortable, I'm all right with going into uncomfortable situations. And I thought, that's a really, really powerful sort of self-awareness that actually, yes, I know I'll be uncomfortable, but I know I need to go there. If I'm going to get to where I want, wherever it is.
Absolutely.
And I think, and at 6, you and I are the same age there, that I think there is an important thing as well about as you get older, and so as an older black male, do I sort of retreat into the home, into the safe spaces, where you're not intellectually being challenged, you're not being emotionally challenged, you're just nice and safe, but you retreat and you get sort of ossified as such there, or do I want some new things? And I think I know my answer, but I know that actually some of those new things is to be uncomfortable.
No, what is it?
I think there's a quote by Benjamin Franklin, died at 25, buried at 75.
That's a good one.
And so look, in terms of uncomfortable, so lots of things I've done in life have been uncomfortable. Athletics, counselling. I was the only Caribbean guy out of 48 people, loads of white women. And then by Christmas, it had gone down from 48 to kind of half that. I was still the only Caribbean guy. So lots of my life has been out my own. I'm doing open water swimming. You can rest assured there ain't many black guys doing that. And so last year I really struggled. So I swam from about May to October last year. Struggled every Saturday I went. People were very friendly and so forth. And I perhaps didn't ask for help as much as I should have done. And this year I was really struggling, literally until about 6 weeks ago. So there's four women who. So basically, I'd kind of breaststroke to the first boy, struggle to the second buoy, walk out, get onto the shore, get my breath back, get back into the water, and then come back to the first buoy.
Yeah, not talk to anyone.
Yeah,
yeah, that's all right. When I go to new settings, I don't talk to anyone.
Right. One Saturday, about 6 weeks ago, I was swimming back to the first buoy. So one of them said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Go back to the first buoy." I said, "No, you're not." I said, "I am." "No, you're not. You're coming with us." I said, "No, I'm not. I'm going back to the first buoy." I said, "Look, come around with us. Be very slow. Look, we'll go around slowly." And I thought to myself, well, what can go wrong? I've got a wetsuit. The spotter's in the water. I'll be fine. So they took me around and they gave me some tips. So 300 metres. So the furthest I'd been ever. No, it wasn't the furthest. The furthest I'd been for quite some time. Went around 300 metres. Went around again. I think we went around 3 times. And then the following week, we went a bit further with a couple of women. Then 3 weeks, I think literally 2 weeks ago, I did the big lap, 750 metres. I had to be uncomfortable to start off with, but you meet good people along the way, and I think we do live in a racialised society. But I always say to people, you'll always meet good people along the way. If you've got a good attitude, you're teachable, you'll find good people. You can be Caribbean, you find good white people, good African, good Asian, good Chinese, which I've done, and they'll be supportive. But you have to leave your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And be uncomfortable for a while. In fact, where we grow and learn is in the uncomfortable zone.
Yeah.
Not in the comfort zone.
Yeah, absolutely.
So listen, I'm 65. I don't want to retire. I said to somebody last night, I've got no intention of dying yet. Now, of course, things could happen, but I just think.
And you definitely don't want to be the Benjamin Franklin.
No.
Died at 65, buried at 88.
So no, I just think there's still lots for me to do. I've just started my business and I'm just really enjoying it. I've just become a granddad, so I want to be around for him, and that he gets to know me, and that I'm not somebody who his parents tell him about, that he kind of gets to know me. So I just think if you want to do something different, and now there's just loads of things we can do.
Yeah. Can I just go with the granddad one there, because I'm a granddad as well, and
I am a granddad.
And you're a granddad as well, so there's 3 granddads in the house.
Yeah.
All up your hand for it. But, and it's interesting because, I watched Jessica Ennis's Who Do You Think You Are programme a few weeks ago, and if you've not seen it, watch it, because it's a really fascinating one there. So both sides of the family, on the sort of like British white side there was Sheffield side was very, very interesting, and then on the dad's side there, and she could go back. When she goes to Jamaica, the historian says to her, this is quite rare, you can go back to your 4th removed your granddad 4 times.
Okay.
Which is about 1838.
Okay, right, okay.
Now, slavery ends in 1834, he does.
Oh, that's right, yes.
And then they have 4 years of apprenticeship.
Yeah.
So he's on this estate, and he's a cooper.
Okay.
Making barrels.
Okay.
And he's a skilled person. So when slavery ends in 1834, he's then able to be selling his labour back to the estate. And in 1838, they sell the estate, and he buys 100 acres.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, so this family story of they've got land, and as a result, therefore, his name is on, they've got a record of his name, and the Jamaican historian says, you can't, this is a rarity, going that far back. And it made me think about my own grandchildren and thinking to myself, well, I only know my mum and dad, really. Because I never knew my mum and dad. My mum and dad's parents. I didn't know my grandparents.
Yeah, me too.
Which is a fairly common thing for people like... And in your book, you talk about Caribbeans who are sort of twice removed from Africa.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's a literal bit, isn't it?
Yeah,
and not knowing one's history.
Yeah.
And when you talk about history... I don't know my personal history.
Yeah, sure.
Forget about the bigger bits.
Yeah.
I can read books about the biggest bits, but I cannot tell you the date of when my grandparents were born. I cannot tell you the names of my great-grandparents there. And I feel at the moment, having watched that, it's been there for a while, it's prompted me to think, well, okay then, not only do I want to be around for my grandchildren for a couple of more decades, I'd like to be passing something on to them, more than just what I've lived.
Of course. Yeah.
It's weird you say that. I had a very interesting conversation with the missus yesterday about that very thing, because we were talking about, I remember a while back saying, thinking about writing an eulogy.
Okay.
My own eulogy.
Yeah.
Because I'm aware that there are certain things that I haven't spoken to my kids about. And besides, we are dealing with a generation that don't listen much, or even when they listen, they don't really give us the inkling that they are listening. And that's when I thought to myself, maybe for their own service, let me write this thing and then give it to them, and then they can deal with it. Because I know someone who has even written a program for their own funeral. You see what I'm saying? And this is somebody from our community. Because I'm aware that we have lost an aspect of that oral tradition, and even just the pure idea of just gathering as a people and just chopping it up and getting to know each other, and so we can pass on information. So, kind of going back to what you were saying about being a granddad. What did you learn from your own parents, which prepared you, which some of the skill sets you are going to use, in this new?
That's a really good question.
You can't beat them, no,
Yeah, no, you can't. No, you can't strike them. No, but just on that point, my parents were really good, because my dad was brought up quite rough. But he said to me, he knew you don't raise your kids by beating them. You talk to them.
So your dad then, in a sense, was breaking a cycle.
Oh yeah, it was.
Yes, and he was aware enough to know that actually, because you talk to guys of that generation now, and there were some who were like that. They could see it, and they say their slavery days. That is basically that. But some people found it difficult to even see their own frustration and anger.
I think in terms of the building block, I just think my parents, and I think I've only appreciated. So my dad died nearly 40 years ago.
Yeah.
He's 52 when he died.
Yeah.
But I think it's only the last 2 or 3 years that there's certain things I realised. So, for example, just going back for a moment when he took a day off to do the sports, he worked Saturday. He lost a day's pay. I only worked that out literally 18 months ago as I was thinking about it.
So that bit which when Lungani said, you don't know if they're listening to you, as if it's a generational thing. There you are you're doing that. Your dad's taking a Saturday off there, but you don't see it.
No.
Well, actually, he is actually doing something of, I'm supporting my child. He's the only black parent there. He's taking his Saturday off there where he's losing pay there.
Yeah, lots of days. Yeah.
You might have known something. You don't know what it is you were feeling. Maybe.
No, I think I was glad that he was there, because it was so rare. You just didn't see Caribbean parents, because in fact doing sports anyway, they weren't interested in sports. It's about your book, about education.
Take your book.
Yeah, that's right. Get your book. Take your book. But they were really good. So I think going back to your question, which I think is a really, really good question. At the minute, I don't know. I think one of the things I would like to do, I've said to my daughter that one of the things I didn't do with my dad. I said to my daughter that when Zion gets a bit older, I'm going to take him swimming. So it's 5 months now. So a few months I'll be taking him swimming. So I said when he gets a bit older, I said bring him round to the house and just show him how to rub up some dumpling. So those things I didn't do with my dad or even my mum, to be honest. So I think what I would like to do. You've asked a really good question. That maybe some of the life skills that I think are really important, I can pass on to him. I guess his mother might do it, but I would like to pass on some life skills.
I think as well, you say that, you'll bring your grandchild or children in the future around, and you're cooking with them, you're doing things with them, because it's in the doing where the stories come from.
Yeah, that's right. Yes,
the stories which you want them to have a sense of, that was granddad. That granddad's from that sort of generation. Granddad connects with a generation before.
Sure.
You're making up the dumpling there, whatever. Even if it's a few times a year, you're making it up. That act itself there is a memory, isn't it? When you listen to, I was listening yesterday to a Asian food writer in The Guardian. She was on the radio, and she was saying that when she grew up in Lincolnshire, that she just ate her mum's food. And when she went to university, people were saying to her, "Oh, we'll go to curry house." And you thought, but that ain't a curry. That ain't Indian food. And she phoned her mum up and said, "Oh, can you send some recipes?" And no, I'm not sending you any recipes. You've got to come home and cook with me, which is the way to learn to cook.
Of course.
Because many of us do. That's how we learned. I mean, I don't remember my mother. My father was rubbish at the cooking, but I don't. You know, I was saying, you know, the why I stopped eating meat was because of that very thing. I thought this brother is gonna kill us.
And my dad was like that. He used to do on a Friday. My dad used to like to on a Friday after work. He'd come home with his brandy, cherry brandy, and if he wasn't having cow foot.
Right.
Which I didn't like. I never liked cow.
I do like cow.
You like cow foot?
I do, yeah.
He'd do corned beef.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Corned beef hash, you know, and he'd have baked beans, bully beef.
Yeah.
But he used to cook it with all the fat and put more fat into it.
Right.
So he used to just swim with fat.
That's the thing, because with us we didn't have that, you know, which you are found here, you know, kind of coming to this part of the world where you cook a meal and then you make gravy on its own.
Yeah.
With us, it was just bare water in that meat.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it didn't really wasn't appealing to the eye, let alone didn't taste that great.
Yeah. My dad wasn't a brilliant cook, but mum wasn't particularly brilliant, to be honest. But you know, food that you could eat, you know, it was fine. But I think over the years, in fact, as a friend of mine, we started cooking together. 2 young boys, we started cooking. We were about 11. Started off with cheese straws, and then what happened? My dad was in hospital. I just started to cook a little bit. My dad was in hospital. My mum went to go and visit him every day, and my sister. My mum just said to me, "Delroy, you're gonna have to cook the meals for us. So when we come home." And I remember the very first meal that I cooked. It was lamb chops, mashed potatoes, green peas, and the gravy was like concrete. And that's the first meal that I cooked when I was about 14. And then you just build on that, really. But yeah, I remember the first meal: lamb chops, mashed potatoes, peas, and very thick gravy.
So your grandchildren can look forward to cooking sessions with
their granddad.
But you're right though. It's the stories, isn't it?
Yes.
It is the story.
It's the stories that I know that I'll share with him, or if there's other children, as we're kind of cooking the meal.
Yeah.
That's it. Because really the cooking, I think sometimes the process of cooking, I cook, and it's the process of the cooking that's when, you know, the trying out new ideas.
That's right,
and talking about where you learned how your first meal you ever cooked, sharing those stories, and the food becomes the occasion, because even the food preparation is an occasion. One thing that we usually try and end with is, what is your thing? You know, if we, you know, for Don it's his elopement, but what is your thing? What is that thing that where you feel at your best?
Do you know what's? I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and he was talking about kind of getting back on the bike. But he said to me, "I'm really glad you found something that's you. Do you know, at the minute I'm really enjoying swimming, open water swimming, and I never ever thought I'd enjoy it. And obviously the water's getting colder now, so there's certain things you need to do. But I just never thought I'd be enjoying it. So for me at the minute, that's the thing. And I'm doing a lot of reflecting on my life at the moment, because both of you know that I was a pastor for nearly 30 years, and I walked away from it 6 years ago, and other things I'd walked away from. So that, when in fact it would have been easier to stay. Like lots of people, people might be listening, might be in a job, and it's easier to stay because the thought of leaving it, when you've known it for so long, and I would say it takes an act of bravery and courage to kind of walk away from it, but I had to. So I'm having to reflect on my life a bit, significantly so, a whole manner of things, relationships, my relationship with my daughters, my new grandson. Allegedly I meant to be retiring, but I enjoy what I do, so I won't be retiring, so I'll be working until, I've got two men in my life who, one's 76, who no signs of letting up. The other one's 80, no signs of letting up. And I was talking to an event organizer recently. He must be in his 50s, who just finished doing some training with a 93-year-old, a woman, show no signs of letting up. So I don't know. What's my thing? It's a good question, you know. It's a good question. In fact, this morning? Yeah, this morning, I started journaling, and the question I asked myself, Delroy, what do you really, really want? Because I've been involved in quite a lot over the years, and as a pastor, you really are kind of multidisciplined. But Delroy, what do you really, really want? So I'm kind of wrestling with that one at the moment.
So are we going to see another book in the horizon? Or?
There's an idea that I've got actually. I've got the basic of an outline, and yeah, the title might be "I Should Have Been a Property Developer."
I like that.
That's a bit different to the book, which your first book. Can I give a plug for his book?
Yeah, please.
The book, A Redemption Song: Illuminations on Black British Pastoral Theology and Culture. Delroy Hall.
Yes,
I really enjoyed it. So
I am going to go and buy my own
next book.
Yeah, just.
I am going.
Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and never miss an episode. Until next time, keep those conversations going and the clippers buzzing.